All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Local Government Insights podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership, your source and insight for local government technology. My name is Brennan Milton, and today we're going to be speaking with the archivist from Monroe County, Pennsylvania, Kelly Smith, on how she helped lead a county-wide paperless initiative. Welcome to the show, Kelly. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So for our listeners, briefly, as the county archivist, Kelly is responsible for managing the long-term storage and preservation of official records and ensuring the public has access to them across the county. Monroe County was established back in 1821, and over the course of time, the amount of paper that was accumulating from this span of more than 100 years was exponential, obviously leading the county to eventually embark on a paperless initiative of some sort. So today we're going to discuss what drove the county at this point in time when they started this process to venture towards this initiative and really dive into the steps they were taking to achieve it. So Kelly, I'd like to just jump right in here. First,
Mhm.
I think it'd be helpful just to understand the amount of paper that was growing into this issue that we're talking about from Monroe County. And could you describe the situation of how records were being stored at the time?
Well, in some of the offices, there are boxes in hallways, there are boxes, the Prothonotari's office, there are boxes on the floor, just all around the desks. There's an old jail that's kind of a cool old building, but it is full to the brim of boxes of papers. There's a storage unit, and yeah, most of these are in unstable environments,
Yeah.
and so it's with no humidity control, no temperature control. Some of the lighting doesn't work. It's kind of a bad issue, and something needed to be done. People were tripping. We actually had somebody break a bone.
Wow.
Um, they're also packed to the brim in the courthouse. There's something called movable shelving. It's inside the walls.
Yeah.
And so there's an opening in the wall and where you can access the files, and you press a button and it revolves inside the wall. And there's a lot of concern about the weight because that is also filled, it's packed, and there's a lot of concern about the weight.
Got it. And I can imagine over that long a span of years, I mean, the paper must be busting out of the seams in, like you mentioned, multitude of different areas within the county and the county offices. So when you decided to kind of move forward with this, what we're calling paperless initiative, which I think is super impactful, what were some of the most important factors that you considered early on in not only determining what process to take, but also selecting a vendor to help you with this? And like, what should other counties think about as they're evaluating their digital transformation, we'll call it?
Well, one thing that was really important was we wanted a vendor who could do the job on site. Some of them offered to do it remotely. I believe Avenue did as well, but we wanted some control over the paper flow. Some of the papers, like the Prothonotary, still needs to access some of the paper that's being scanned right now.
Yeah.
So we just thought it would be easier and make us feel more comfortable if the scanning people were on site. It facilitates communication. We can see faces. It just made me more comfortable. Um, I want to consult my notes here.
Yeah.
We needed some of these documents, especially the ones that have been stored in not unstable environments for so long. They are getting a little bit hard to read. Some of them are brittle. The handwriting is fading. The ink, whatever it was written with. So we needed the documents to be readable. We needed a vendor who could do indexing.
Yeah.
Um, we wanted a vendor who could scan books, bound books, without having to tear them apart.
Important.
Quality control was a huge issue. Avenue promised us 100% quality control, which was very important. The experience of the vendor with doing these kind of projects, and then price. For some people that's the first priority. For me, it was not.
Understood. Understood. And if we could shift just a bit and just talk about the actual process as this project began and it kicked off, like how did you and the team in general decide which records to begin scanning? I know we mentioned and we talked in our pre-show, you had the overflow areas like you mentioned before, and you guys were paying for storage. And you mentioned in parallel to this, there was a courthouse renovation project going on. As you mentioned, there's lots of records in the courthouse. And how you evaluated what types of stored documents by department and where to begin. Like, can we talk about like that process and how you evaluated where to begin, how to begin, and then how to start chipping away at this in different phases?
Well, we have a business analyst who has been going around to the different departments to examine their processes, examine how they could be more efficient, and what they could eliminate as far as paper. And so he helped identify departments that were in dire need, the priority of the departments. And one of the other prioritizing factor was courthouse. We have a courthouse renovation going on.
Yeah.
So there have already been offices moving. Some of them will be moving back. There's just going to be a lot of movement between buildings in the next few years while this annex is being built. So, and so that allowed us to decide, wow, and also the DA, or excuse me, the detectives, they're paying rent for that storage unit, and that was
Yeah.
a factor. So yeah, but I would say mostly the courthouse renovation is the biggest issue.
And that actually brings to mind one point I'd like to touch on is the record retention schedule. And did you have to consider like specific state records retention rules in this process? And like, if so, like what are they in Pennsylvania and how may that, relate to some others that may be listening to this show?
Well, Pennsylvania does allow for entities to destroy physical records as long as they meet certain requirements. So we had to prove that we had a preservation copy and a use copy. Has to be redundancy. There has to be a live environment. There are just specific areas that the IT had to address in order for us to say, yes, we are going to be able to take care of the electronic permanent records so we can destroy the physical ones. Because otherwise, what's the point? We would still have to figure out what to do with all this
Right.
paper.
Right.
So yes, that was a big consideration, and we are making sure that we're meeting those requirements.
Got it. And to come back just a little bit to the process a little bit, I want to dive a little deeper there. In terms of the internal processes, like as the decisions were being made, like for other county officials considering digitizing their records for the first time potentially, or they're in process or in flight of doing this themselves. Um, for those that are just beginning, where do they begin from your perspective and based on your experience? Like what internal processes did you take? Was there an inventory that was taken up front, and did you make space for in-house scanning, like did Avenue or vendor come on site and you guys set aside specific space for them to do the work? What did that whole process look like? Can you paint that picture for us?
When Avenue came in to initially look into when they were before we had decided and they were
Yeah.
doing their estimates and everything, so we did this with all of the vendors. We went around to the different departments and they showed us all, the whole team, this is what we have, this is what we have to scan, this is where all our documents are, and this is the quantity that we're estimating that we have. So we did that. We also made sure, once we knew that we had Avenue, we were going to go with Avenue and they were going to be on site. We chose a room to do the first phase of the project. There's a chance that they're going to have to move around to different buildings and different rooms. We're not sure yet. But for the
Mhm.
first phase of the project, they are in this one room. We made sure they had enough space. We made sure that they had the Wi-Fi, the networking that they needed. We also considered a few different workflows as far as the county was concerned. The scanning people had their own workflow as far as what they were doing,
Yeah.
but we had to figure out how to get the materials to them and then put away whatever they had already scanned. So we tried a couple of different workflows, and now we're doing, it's me. it's I am the person who is making that happen. Um, and then we also had to decide how often we were going to meet. And at first it was every week, and now it's every other week or as needed, as because there have been some other projects that have come up in the meantime. Um, and we also had to discuss naming conventions and discussing. Unfortunately, it would be so nice if every single office used the same platform to
Sure.
scan and access documents, but they don't. So for each time, we have to discuss how to import the data from Avenue to whatever platform they're using.
Got it. And on top of a planned project of this magnitude, obviously you do go into it with a plan and there's a project plan, but there's a lot going on. Sometimes you have to pivot from where you intended to go from the beginning, and sometimes we kind of shift our decision making or shift different processes. I think it's important to talk about, were there any types of ad hoc requests or changes that needed to happen midstream that would be important for others as they're venturing into this world of digital transformation, like they can be aware of, that maybe you saw or the team saw as they're going through, that maybe this is the better way of doing it, or maybe we need to change how we're going about things? Were there any ad hoc requests that came up that kind of required reprioritization of some sort throughout the project?
Well, before we even started with prothonotary, we did decide to go with prothonotary files first. Before we even did that, there was an issue with a case, an ongoing court case, and I believe the lawyers and the stakeholders in that case were having trouble communicating with the files. They were having trouble sharing files and communicating. So Avenue completed that project first. And I can't remember how many boxes there were, but before anything even started, they had to do that first.
Yeah.
Then the coroner's office just moved from the administration building where the scanning team currently is to a different building. And they used to transfer boxes to the archives, and
Mm-hmm.
I ran out of space. I said, I have nowhere, can't put these boxes anywhere. There's just
Right.
nowhere. And they didn't have any place in their new office. So then we had to figure out, we decided to just interrupt everything and do all of the coroner's files that we have from 1836 to 2019 so far. And so we interrupted everything and we did that. And now the Prothonotari's office is moving, so we weren't planning to do anything from their office for a while. But now, and I'm not sure when this is going to happen, but it has to happen before February. We need to do the books, docket books, and all those kind map books, things like that are in their office.
Awesome.
Huh.
So let's talk about success just for a minute, and what kind of results look like, and what kind of, as you've gone through this process, or you're continuing it obviously, but as you've gone through it, like once the records are digitized and indexed and available digitally, what will the process look like for accessing those, or where will those be stored, and how do we evaluate like success from a project of this magnitude?
Oh, it'll be so much easier right now. And I used to work in the Prothonotari's office. I worked there for a couple months, so I'm most familiar with their
Yep.
situation. They are currently in the courthouse, and if a judge or somebody requests a record, they either have to go to the old jail, which is a different building, or to the administration building, which is also a different building. So they have to go to a whole different building, retrieve the record, go back to the courthouse, give it to them, and then once they get the record back, they have to give it, they have to take it back to wherever they got it from. So now it'll just be a click of a couple buttons, at their, nobody has to leave their desk. It'll just be there. They can just print off whatever copies they want if they have to, or they can just email whatever copies, whatever pages they need. It's going to save a lot of time and hopefully money, I would think.
Sure. Yeah. So amazing. So amazing. I have in my notes here, we were talking about indexing in the pre-show interview, and talked about a minute ago, like lessons learned or ad hoc requests or changes in process. Like, what are any lessons learned that you have that you mentioned to me early on about indexing and naming conventions? And what would you recommend others consider as they're going through developing some sort of sequence by which they index records?
So you have to think about the current physical organization of the records, the physical records and how they're organized. And again, I'm going to go with the prothonotary as an example. They are organized by case number. But then you also have to think about how future public or
Sure.
judges or whoever want to look for the
Access.
case, and people don't always know the case number. So we decided to get, sometimes they just know the plaintiff, sometimes they just know the defendant, whatever. So we decided to go with case number, plaintiff name, defendant name. And so it's very important to think about the current physical organization and how people might think in the future what information they have in order to be able to retrieve these documents.
Like a combination of how it is today and how you view it being accessed in the future, and
Right.
provide, come up with a collaborative or a combination of those two, which creates, a record of where it is today, which accurately stores it, and then how it's going to be accessed in the future is important
Correct.
as you're developing an indexing strategy.
Yeah. Yes.
That's great. So, Kelly, I like to just kind of wrap up by talking about, for other local governments, and I've mentioned this throughout the conversation today. I think it's super important because we have lots of listeners from all walks of life, all different types of jurisdiction sizes across the country. And for other local governments, either contemplating starting a type of initiative that you've already, come so far in, or they're in process. What other words of wisdom or advice that you would have for other archivists or county recorders or clerks that, as they're going through this process themselves in this journey of bringing things into a digital world, what would you lend to them?
Well, think about projects that you have ahead, such as with us with the courthouse renovation project. That was a huge factor in deciding to do this. Um, don't just think about the money. When you're going, when you're having vendors come in and meeting with them, get references and really observe how those vendors evaluate the project. I was really impressed with Ann Kirkbride and how the questions that she asked, the information that she gathered, she was so detail oriented and was a great representative for her company. And so, yeah, that's, I would say do all that and also be flexible. Like we had to do with these other projects coming in that we weren't prepared for and we didn't know were going to happen. This is a 5-year project and it's probably going to happen again. And so you kind of have to be ready for anything and be flexible.
Excellent. Past performance is important and flexibility is key. I
Yes.
like that as good takeaways. That's awesome. Well, Kelly, I won't take too much more of your time. Thank you so much for doing this. Honestly, thank you for telling your story. I think it's super impactful, and congratulations on the success and future success as you continue to move through this journey of digital transformation. We appreciate you sharing your insight, and thank you for our audience for listening to the Local Government Insights podcast. If you haven't done so, please make sure to subscribe and rate the podcast. We look forward to having you join us next time. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thank you.